In the world of high-stakes real estate development, there were two kinds of people. The ones who got their names on buildings, and the ones who made sure those buildings didn't collapse, legally, financially, or structurally. Margo Delacroix had always been the second kind. She was 31 years old, 5'4", and built like someone who had never once turned down her grandmother's Sunday cooking. She wore her dark hair pinned back in a low bun, so tight it gave her a permanent look of mild irritation, which, honestly, was accurate. She had a master's degree in urban planning from Northwestern, spoke 3 languages fluently, and could dissect a zoning ordinance the way a surgeon dissected tissue. Clean, methodical, leaving nothing to chance. She had worked for Hartwell Capital Group for 4 years, and in those 4 years, she had saved the company from 3 regulatory disasters, 2 hostile acquisition attempts, and 1 genuinely catastrophic misread of a city council vote that would have cost them $47 million on a single afternoon. Nobody in the executive suite knew her name. That wasn't entirely true. They knew she existed the way people knew their building had a foundation. Abstractly, theoretically, grateful for the stability without ever once looking down. Cole Hartwell knew her name. He just didn't know her face. That was the thing about running a $2 billion property empire from the 42nd floor of your own building in downtown Boston. You stopped seeing the machinery. You saw the outcome. You signed the papers that Delacroix had already annotated, flagged, cross-referenced, and quietly restructured to protect you, and you moved on to the next deal without ever asking who had done the actual thinking. Margo had made peace with this, or she had told herself she had. The truth, if she was being honest, and she rarely let herself be, was that it had started to feel like wearing a coat 3 sizes too large. She was inside it. She was doing the work, but nobody saw the shape of her. She was eating her lunch at her desk on a Thursday in October when it started. Not the romance. She wasn't the kind of woman who believed in romance the way other people believed in it, like a weather event that might or might not reach your zip code. What started was the thing that would end up changing everything, which was that the Meridian Tower deal began to fall apart. She heard it first in the way the office changed temperature. Not literally. The climate control on the 14th floor was famously aggressive, always hovering between refrigerated and aggressive refrigeration. What she felt was the specific drop in ambient noise that happened when people stopped talking about things they wanted to talk about and started talking quietly about things they were afraid of. Doors that usually hung open started closing. The executive assistant, a nervous young man named Brett who stress-ate protein bars all day, walked past her office 3 times in 20 minutes without making eye contact. Margo put down her salad fork. She pulled up the Meridian file. It took her 11 minutes to find it. The problem that no one had yet managed to articulate clearly enough to put into a sentence. The city of Boston's newly appointed planning commissioner had quietly reclassified a 3-block radius near the proposed tower site as a historic preservation corridor. The reclassification had gone into effect 6 days ago. Nobody on the Hartwell acquisitions team had caught it, because nobody on the Hartwell acquisitions team read the Planning Commission's supplemental bulletins, which were published in a formatting so hostile to human comprehension that they might as well have been written in ancient Sumerian. Margo read them every week. She had the reclassification memo open on one screen and the Meridian construction timeline on the other when her office door opened without a knock. She looked up. Cole Hartwell was taller than she'd expected. She had seen him from a distance, in the elevator once, at a company event she had attended, and he had swept through like weather. But close up, he was different. He had the kind of face that suggested he had never in his life been surprised by anything, and the kind of bearing that suggested he had spent a long time practicing not being surprised. Dark suit, no tie. Eyes the color of Old Harbor water, gray-green, and not particularly warm. He looked at her like he was trying to place her. "You're Delacroix," he said. "I am," she said. "Henderson says you already know about Meridian." Henderson was the head of acquisitions. She had emailed him 8 minutes ago. "I found the reclassification," she said. "The Commissioner's office filed it under Supplemental Bulletin 44C. It wasn't in the main registry, which is why your team missed it." Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, she had been right about that, but something sharper, recalibration. "How bad is it?" he said. "Depends on what you mean by bad," she said. "The reclassification doesn't kill the project. It complicates the height variance application and eliminates 2 of your originally planned subterranean levels. You lose roughly 8% of your total leasable square footage. But," she turned her second monitor toward him, "there's a carve-out provision in the Preservation Ordinance for mixed-use developments that include a minimum threshold of publicly accessible cultural space. If you modify the ground floor plan to incorporate a civic gallery or performance venue, you qualify for the exemption and you recover most of what you lose." Cole Hartwell looked at her monitor, then he looked at her. "You've had this file open for 11 minutes, he said. 12 now, she said. He didn't say anything for a moment. She watched him think. She had never been this close to him before, and she noticed, in the detached way she noticed most things about powerful men, that he was working very hard to look like he wasn't recalibrating everything he thought he knew about the organizational structure of his own company. "Come upstairs," he said. "I want you in the room when I talk to the legal team. I have a 1 o'clock, she said. Reschedule it." She held his gaze for exactly long enough to make clear that she was choosing to comply, not simply complying. "Give me 5 minutes, she said. She went upstairs. The room was full of men in expensive suits, who looked at her with the particular expression of people encountering something unexpected in a place they had previously considered fully mapped. She set her laptop on the conference table, pulled up the ordinance language, and talked for 22 minutes. Nobody interrupted her. This was unusual. She had been in rooms like this before, and she was accustomed to being interrupted, the politely dismissive kind, the kind where someone restated what she had just said in slightly different words and received credit for it. It didn't happen this time. Cole Hartwell sat at the head of the table and watched her with the focused stillness of someone who had stopped doing anything other than listening. When she was done, he said, "What's the timeline for the modification filing?" 48 hours if we move today, she said. "After that, the original application triggers an automatic review period, and you lose 90 days. Do we have the ground floor plans? I'll need to coordinate with the architectural firm," she said. "I can have a preliminary layout to the Planning Commissioner's office by tomorrow afternoon if someone gives me direct access to the Meridian project folder." There was a pause. "Give her the access," Cole said. She worked through the night. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that at 9:47 p.m., when the 42nd floor was otherwise dark and silent, and the cleaning crew had already come and gone, Cole Hartwell appeared in the doorway of the small conference room she had commandeered, holding 2 cups of coffee, and looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. She was surrounded by architectural drawings, city ordinance documents, and 3 empty water bottles. Her hair had come partially out of its bun. She had taken off her blazer. She was sitting cross-legged on her chair with a yellow highlighter in one hand and her phone in the other, arguing quietly but with great precision with someone from the Commissioner's office about the definition of publicly accessible. She finished the call. She looked up. He held out one of the coffees. She took it. She wasn't sure what else to do. "You should have gone home," he said. "So should you," she said. He almost smiled. It was a near thing. She could see it approach and then veer away, like a car deciding not to take an exit. He sat down across from her, not in the way that executives usually sat, positioned, performing authority, but in the way that someone sits when they've been on their feet all day and they just need to stop moving. He looked at the drawings spread across the table. "Tell me how you found the reclassification bulletin," he said. She told him. She told him about the supplemental registry, about the quarterly cross-reference she'd built herself because nobody else was doing it, about the habit she'd developed of reading public comment filings, because that was where things got reclassified before they showed up in the official record. He listened the way he had listened in the conference room, completely. "How long have you been doing that?" he said. "Since I started," she said. 4 years, 4 years, he repeated. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "I didn't know your name 6 hours ago." She looked at him directly. "I know. That's—" He stopped. She watched him search for the right word and come up empty. "That's a failure on my part," he said finally. She hadn't expected that. She kept her face neutral. "I'm not looking for an apology," she said. "I'm not offering one," he said. "I'm making an observation. There's a difference." She considered this. "Fair enough," she said. They stayed like that for a while, in the not uncomfortable silence of two people who have been solving the same problem and have briefly stopped. He asked her about the gallery concept. Had she pulled any precedents, other cities where the civic space carve-out had been used to preserve mixed-use development rights? She had. She walked him through 3 case studies. He asked good questions, the kind of questions that meant he had actually absorbed what she'd said rather than just letting it run past him. It was close to midnight when she started packing up. He helped her roll the architectural drawings, without being asked, without making a performance of it, and she noticed that his hands were careful, precise, the way hands are when their owner is used to handling things that matter. "Delacroix," he said, when she was almost at the door. She turned. "What's your first name?" "Margo," she said. He nodded once, like he was filing it somewhere he intended to keep. She filed the modification with the Commissioner's office at 11:14 the following morning. The planning division accepted it. The Meridian project continued on schedule, losing 8% of its square footage and gaining a first-floor civic arts corridor that would, ultimately, win an architectural award and become one of the most cited examples of adaptive development in the city's planning history. Margo would not be mentioned in any of the press coverage. Cole Hartwell called her directly for the first time 2 weeks later. Not through his assistant, not through a forwarded email. Directly, her office extension, which he had apparently located himself, which meant he had specifically gone looking for it. "The Commissioner's office wants a meeting about the Phase 2 substructure permits," he said, without preamble. "I want you there." "I'll be there," she said. This became gradually, and without either of them naming it, a pattern. He called her directly. He wanted her in rooms. He asked questions that only she could answer, not because no one else was smart enough to find the answers, but because she was already 3 steps ahead, and he had figured that out. She went where she was needed. She did the work. The work was what she had always been good at. She told herself that was all it was. She was very good at telling herself things. The problem was the elevator. Specifically, the Tuesday in January when the elevator between the 14th and 42nd floors stopped working, and she took the stairs and arrived at the executive floor, winded and still somehow early, and Cole was already there, waiting, and he looked at her the way he'd started to look at her sometimes, like she was a problem he hadn't yet found the correct framework for, and he was genuinely curious about what the framework would turn out to be. "You took the stairs," he said. "Elevators down," she said. "There are other elevators." "I was already at the stairwell door," she said. "It seemed faster." 28 flights, he said. "I was motivated," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then, completely unexpectedly, he smiled. Not the near miss she had seen before. The full version, which was different than she would have imagined. Less polished, more real. It made him look, briefly, like a person who had not spent the last decade constructing an impenetrable professional exterior. She felt something shift. She told herself it was the exertion. She was very, very good at telling herself things. The thing she couldn't tell herself, the thing that stopped working as a strategy sometime around February, was that her interest in Cole Hartwell was purely professional. She had tried. She had used the word professional as a kind of psychological electric fence, and for a while it had held. He was her employer. He was exactly the kind of man she had spent her entire adult life recognizing as a category of person who would never seriously consider a woman like her. Not because he was overtly cruel, but because men who looked like Cole Hartwell, who moved through the world like Cole Hartwell, had a very specific image of what a woman worth considering looked like, and it did not look like Margo Delacroix with her tight bun and her highlighter collection and her body that her aunties had always called full of life in the affectionate Southern way that meant something else in the rest of the world. She knew this. She was smart enough to know this, which was sometimes the least useful thing about being smart. What she had not accounted for was that Cole Hartwell had apparently not gotten the memo about his own type. He started bringing her coffee when he stayed late. Not every time. She wasn't going to be dramatic about it, but often enough that she stopped being surprised by it. He asked her, once, whether she had always been interested in planning law, or whether she had come to it from somewhere else, and she told him about growing up in Atlanta, about her mother who had been a city council aide, and had taken her to zoning hearings the way other mothers took their daughters to ballet recitals. He listened to all of it. He told her, in exchange, that he had gotten into development because his grandfather had built 3 apartment buildings in South Boston with his own hands, and that every project since was, in some form, his attempt to do something worthy of that. She hadn't expected that. She kept thinking that about him, that she kept not expecting things he did. In March, at a site visit to the Meridian construction location, he stood next to her on the scaffolding platform and pointed out the gap in the skyline where the tower would eventually rise. And the wind off the harbor came up sharp and cold, and without thinking she crossed her arms against it, and he took off his jacket and held it out. She stared at it. "You're cold," he said. "I'm fine," she said. "Margo," he said, just her name, with a patience that was somehow more persuasive than any argument. She took the jacket. She wore it for the rest of the site visit. It was too large and smelled like something she couldn't quite name, cedar, maybe, or something older and quieter than that. She gave it back when they reached the car. She was very deliberate about giving it back. That night, she sat in her apartment in Cambridge and had a long, stern conversation with herself. She listed the reasons this was not a thing that was happening. She listed them methodically, in the order of their importance, the way she organized everything. Cole Hartwell was her employer. He was a person who operated in a world of deliberate choices, and she could not imagine that she figured into any of those choices as anything other than a remarkably useful professional asset. She was not a woman who confused competence for connection. She had made that mistake exactly once, early in her career, and she had no intention of repeating it. She finished her stern conversation. She went to bed. She did not sleep particularly well. The crisis, when it came, arrived, as crises in this world always did, in the form of a phone call at 2 in the morning. It was Cole. "There's a problem," he said. She was awake before he finished the sentence. This was one of the things she had never quite liked about herself, that her nervous system treated professional emergencies the same way other people's treated physical danger. "Tell me," she said. "Someone leaked the Meridian financing structure to the Globe," he said. "They're running a story at 6 a.m. claiming we circumvented the historic preservation protocols. It's not accurate, but they have documents, partial documents taken out of context. And if we don't respond before it publishes, the planning commissioner is going to have to open a formal inquiry to cover himself politically. That inquiry kills the phase 2 permits." She was already at her desk. "Who leaked it?" "That's being dealt with," he said, in a tone that closed the question completely. "Can you build the counter-documentation?" "I need the original filing timestamps," she said. "The chronological record has to be airtight. Everything we submitted to the commissioner's office has to be dated and logged before the reclassification was made public. So the story falls apart on its own merits. I can get you the server logs," he said. "IT director can authorize the pull in 20 minutes. Then I can have a complete documented timeline ready to send to the Globe's editor before 5:30, she said. They'll kill the story if the factual record doesn't hold. Margo, he said. The way he said her name had changed, she noticed, since October. The first time I'd said it, it had been a filing, a label, a locator. Now it had weight. It had the specific weight of something that mattered. What? She said. This is the third time you've pulled this company back from the edge of something it didn't see coming, he said. I need you to know that I see it. She was quiet for a moment. Get me the server logs, she said. She worked until 5:15. She sent the documented timeline to the Globe at 5:22. The editor called Cole at 5:40, confirmed the discrepancy in the leaked materials, and killed the story. The Planning Commission's office received a courtesy copy of the timeline that morning, preemptively, with a note that Margo drafted and Cole signed. At 7 a.m., Cole appeared at her apartment door. She had not given him her address. She was aware, technically, that he could have found it through the company's HR records, which he had access to as principal officer. This was perhaps something she should have found alarming. She found, instead, that she was too tired for alarm. She opened the door. She was wearing a Northwestern sweatshirt and pajama pants with small blue anchors on them. Her hair was entirely down. She had not had time to reassemble herself into the version of herself that she presented to the world. He was holding a paper bag from the bakery 3 blocks from her apartment, which meant he had walked those 3 blocks, which meant he had walked past 2 other bakeries to reach that specific one, which meant he had looked it up. You knew my address, she said. HR records, he said. I'm aware that's probably inappropriate. It's definitely inappropriate, she said. I know, he said. He held out the bag. They had the rosemary sea salt focaccia, the good kind. She stared at him. She had mentioned once in passing, during a working lunch 3 months ago, that the focaccia from that specific bakery was the only bread worth eating in the greater Boston metropolitan area. She had said it while reading a permit application, and she had been barely paying attention to herself when she said it. He had remembered. Cole, she said. Margo, he said. What is this? He looked at her steadily. The harbour water eyes, not cold now. Something else. Something that had been building, she realized, since October, which she had been extremely professionally determined not to see. I think you know what this is, he said. I think, she said carefully, that I am very tired, and possibly not in the best state for this conversation. That's fair, he said. Have breakfast with me. Then we can decide whether to have the conversation. She looked at the bag. She looked at him. She thought about all the reasons this was inadvisable, impractical, and almost certainly some form of power imbalance she should be thoughtful about. She thought about the electric fence of professional and how thoroughly it had failed. Come in, she said. I'll make coffee. They sat at her small kitchen table and ate focaccia and drank coffee and talked. About the night, about the story that hadn't run, about the leak and what it meant for the internal structure of his executive team. And then gradually, as the morning light came through her east-facing window and the city started to wake up around them, about other things. He asked her where she'd learned to cook. She told him about her grandmother, about Louisiana, about the summers she had spent in a kitchen that smelled like garlic and rendered fat and something ineffable that she had never been able to replicate exactly. He listened. She watched him listen, and she thought, this is the part nobody tells you about. Not the falling. She had anticipated, in the abstract, that the falling would be terrifying and sharp-edged and probably a disaster. What nobody had told her was that there would be a moment, quiet and ordinary, where you realized you had already been falling for months, and that it hadn't felt like falling at all. It had felt like work, like early mornings and late nights and the specific peace of being understood by someone who was paying attention. Cole, she said. Yeah, he said. This is a terrible idea, she said. I work for you. I know there's a significant power differential. I know that too, he said. He put down his coffee cup. I've been thinking about it since January, the elevator. She blinked. The elevator. You took 28 flights of stairs rather than walk an extra 100 feet to a working elevator, he said, And then you were completely unbothered about it. You told me you were motivated, and you meant it, and I thought that's the most honest thing I've heard in years." She did not know what to do with that. She let it settle. "I'd need things to change," she said, "structurally. I can't work in a position where my professional standing is dependent on—" "Agreed," he said immediately. "I've already talked to Hendricks." Hendricks was the board's outside counsel. "There's a framework for this, if that's what you want." She looked at him. "You talked to outside counsel," she said. "2 weeks ago," he said. "I was being methodical," he said, and he looked for a moment almost uncertain, which on his face was so unfamiliar that she felt something in her chest loosen. She reached across the table and picked up his coffee cup and handed it back to him because it was easier than saying what she was thinking, which was, "I have been watching you pay attention for 6 months, and I have been very carefully not letting myself believe it meant anything, and I was wrong, and I am almost never wrong, and it is an enormous relief to be wrong about this." "This is still probably a terrible idea," she said. "Most of the best things are," he said. She smiled. "The full version, not the careful professional one she wore in conference rooms, but the other one, the real one, the one that her grandmother said could stop traffic." "Don't make me regret this," she said. "Margo," he said. He picked up his cup, held her gaze. "Let the harbor water eyes be warm for once. I have spent 6 months being methodical about this. I am not going to make you regret it." She did not regret it. Not when the board asked questions and she had to sit in a room and explain, with the steady precision she brought to everything, exactly why her professional record stood entirely on its own. Not when she moved offices, her choice, not his, to a position that reported to the board directly, which turned out to be a better job with more authority and zero ambiguity. Not on the afternoon, 8 months later, when he walked into her new office on the 28th floor without knocking. He had never learned to knock. She had decided to let it go and set something on her desk. She looked at it. It was a small framed photograph from the Meridian Tower opening ceremony. In it, she was standing at a podium in front of the civic arts corridor she had designed around a zoning exemption, speaking to a room full of planning commissioners and city officials. She had not known the photo was being taken. Cole was in the background of the photo, off to one side, not at the podium, not in the center. He was watching her speak with the expression she had come to know, the one that meant he was paying close attention to something that mattered to him. She looked up at him. "Where did you get this?" she said. "Press photographer," he said. "I had it pulled." "It's not a very flattering photo of you," she said. "I'm not in it for me," he said. She set it down carefully. She looked at it for a moment, at herself at the podium, mid-sentence, clearly in the middle of making a point she considered important, entirely unaware that anyone was photographing her. She looked solid and certain, and she had to admit, like someone who knew exactly where she stood, she looked up at him. "Thank you," she said. He sat down across from her desk, in the chair she kept for people she wanted to stay. "The Phase 3 permits came through," he said. "I know," she said. "I approved the filing." "Of course you did," he said. She picked up her highlighter. He reached across the desk and stole her coffee. This was also something he did. She had decided to let that go too. Outside, through her 28th floor window, the Boston skyline was going gold in the late afternoon light, and somewhere in it, rising clean above the harbor, was the framework of Meridian Tower, her civic corridor at its base, her work in its bones. Invisible, still to anyone who didn't know where to look. She had decided she was done being invisible to the people who mattered.